I don't think this movie should have happened, but it did. So
I'm not a huge anime person. I've watched a couple of shows over the years. It's maybe a cool experiment, but in some ways it was an unnatural joining, in my opinion. Because Tolkien and Lord of the Rings are so purely Western, it felt kind of like an unnatural binding.
I think within the realm, it's Lord of the Rings hasn't yet gone the Star Wars route.
No, it hasn't. I think almost anybody, if they're more casual fans like you two, I think they'll thoroughly enjoy this probably. I also think it protects the movies by being anime instead of live action. So it says if you like it, you can bring it in. If you don't, it's a different art style. You don't have to pretend it's the same thing. Hello, welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew.
Hello.
Hey guys.
Our episode today is about the War of the Rohirrim, the new Lord of the Rings movie in theaters. It's in an anime style. But before we get to that, make sure to like and subscribe to the Pop Culture Contrarian wherever you find your podcasts. On YouTube, make sure to hit the bell so you see when we drop a new video. And check out the patriotpostshop.com as well for merchandise, for cool Second Amendment stickers, mugs, all sorts of stuff. Make sure to check that out.
There's delicious coffee as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bunch of really cool stuff.
Yep.
Founder's Wisdom.
Founder's Wisdom coffee.
All right. So War of the Rohirrim. Thomas and Andrew, y'all aren't really big Tolkien nerds, are you?
Fan, but not a nerd necessarily.
Yeah, I've enjoyed Tolkien, but...
My fellow nerds and I will retire to the nerdery with our calculator.
Okay, so going into this movie, though, you didn't really know anything about the story or what they were adapting here.
No.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to start. I'm going to grab my book here, and I'm going to read everything we ever learn about the main character of this movie, Hera, daughter of Helm, Hammerhand. So here we go. This is my beautiful copy of Lord of the Rings my sister gave me. It's signed by Elijah Wood.
There's no promise you can make that I can trust.
It's very cool.
That's incredible. I feel like we need pipes right now, and pipes and pints.
It comes in pints? Oh. I can get you one.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, smoking some of the pipe weed.
Yes.
All right,
finest
so
in the Shire.
Yeah.
Old Toby, the finest weed in the South Valley.
So this passage also includes quite a bit of, this is basically everything they had to adapt this movie from. So they take a couple paragraphs and they make a movie out of it. So here we go. To one of these councils, Freka rode with many men, and he asked the hand of Helm's daughter for his son Wolf. But Helm said, "You have grown big since you were last here, but it is mostly fat, I guess." And men laughed at that, for Freka was wide in the belt. There we go.
That's it.
That's all we have about Hera Hammerhand.
Well, they did get that right in the movie.
They do.
Freka was a rather largely endowed, big-boned individual.
He was fat.
Yeah, he was.
So there's no other information beyond that?
That is, there's more information on the story about what happened with Helm and his sons. Okay. But on Hera, who is the main pivotal character of this movie, that line is all we get.
So we don't even know if he would have given her away or not.
No. Well, no. So, okay, I'll read a little bit more. If I just lost my place probably, so that's a bummer. Yeah, I'll find it in a minute. But he does take Freka out, and he frog marches him out of the Hall of Mediceld, says, kings don't fight in their own hall. And then there's no big fight. It's just Helm punches Freka once and kills him.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing
that's his answer is like, no.
Yeah.
One thing I love about Tolkien and that paragraph, or the two paragraphs that you just read, sounds almost like something you could have read from a Anglo-Saxon history, or something that actually might have happened in like a Norse context or an Anglo context during the Middle Ages.
Well, and that's
or prior even. And I know that's the thing about Tolkien. What I love this so much, and this will come back up again in my assessment later. And that is, he creates worlds based on reality, fantasy worlds with origin influences that are real.
Yeah.
And mythology from that era, right?
Yeah, the politics, the scheming of the nobles, that's all very realistic. And it is, you're right to say this reads like something from an Anglo-Saxon history, because exactly what Tolkien was trying to do, was write a mythology for England specifically, but Anglo-Saxons more specifically. And Rohan, the Rohirrim, are explicitly supposed to be Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah.
The Shire represents more, early 20th century England. The Anglo-Saxons represent, like whenever the Anglo-Saxons came to England.
Yeah.
And then the Gondorians are Rome or something like that, I guess.
Sure.
Okay, so this movie is about this completely fictional character within the fictional universe. Completely made up character, Hera Hammerhand, and her adventures in Rohan about 250 years before Frodo goes on his adventure.
Now, you read it out of the Lord of the Rings novel. What was the context of it within that?
So that came from Appendix A. So when Return of the King was published, Tolkien published it with appendixes.
Okay.
And in Appendix A, there's brief histories of the different peoples of Middle-earth. And so that was from Appendix A, the section on the kings of the Rohirrim.
Okay. So it's just like a little background information.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's just a little history to go with the story.
Tolkien was a world builder.
There's no one's as good at building worlds as Tolkien was.
I mean, isn't he credited with creating the fantasy genre effectively?
He definitely created it in his image.
Yeah.
It sort of existed before him, but after him, everything is based on him.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So talking about this movie, though, kind of the big thing I guess you'd first notice is that this is not live action and it's not Western style animation. This is Japanese style anime.
Yeah.
So I'll ask y'all, what were your first thoughts about that?
So this is maybe my biggest takeaway from choosing that medium. I didn't hate it, but I felt it a bit an unnatural joining. And the reason I say that, it was kind of like, as we just said before, Western mythology and story based on just Western stuff in general, but it's mated with a wholly Eastern medium.
Yeah.
And it's maybe a cool experiment, but in some ways it was an unnatural joining, in my opinion. And I know that in the past, like in the 70s, there were Lord of the Rings animated things. So it's not the first time that Lord of the Rings has been animated before.
But the Rankin Bass cartoon, which you're talking about, was very much Western style animation.
Correct. Yeah. So, and I'm not a huge anime person. I've watched a couple of shows over the years. One in particular being Attack on Titan.
I haven't watched that one.
I expect almost nobody will know what that is, and I won't go into that. But I couldn't help but just be thinking about the stories that you normally hear through anime. And to be clear, anime is extremely broad when it is applied to stories. It's not just Asian. So I get why they thought, okay, we can utilize it here. But because Tolkien and Lord of the Rings are so just purely Western, it felt kind of like an unnatural binding.
Yeah, a little bit. I will say, though, not necessarily in defense of anime, but just kind of to give it some context, anime is increasingly a place where you find these kinds of epic stories that are on the same level as Lord of the Rings. At least they're intended to be if you're engaging with the universe.
Yeah, and anime is deep and epic, and the storylines are usually very rich. So I'm not totally knocking it, but just my impression.
Yeah. Thomas, did you have thoughts on the art style?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not as, I don't know the differentiation between what would be considered anime versus like cartoon. I grew up probably seeing more anime, but calling it cartoon.
Yeah. In Korea.
Yeah. So to me, actually, I didn't have that same feeling of this is East mixed with West. To me, it was more of the nature of child storytelling that I grew up with always started with when it was a visual medium, cartoons. And there is something about Lord of the Rings that has a storytelling childlike element, even though this story is quite involved. There's still this kind of feel of you're telling a story to kids around a campfire kind of deal.
It's a simple, like it is complex in its themes and its meanings, but on the surface, it's simple enough that, you know, once they get past all the complicated names, kids can follow what's happening.
Right. And so I felt like it actually worked really well. I think that it definitely leaned really heavy into the Peter Jackson movies as far as, you know, what the topography looked like, you know, like Helm's
structures,
Helm's Deep, Isengard,
the music,
everything. So it felt very much like, okay, I'm watching something from Lord of the Rings. And like, what was the name of the town where that starts in?
Edoras.
Edoras. Yeah. I mean, that looks just like it pretty much did in the movies, just in a little, you know, more of an anime form. So that didn't distract me really that much. It was pretty quick to get into it. I didn't know any of the characters because, like you said, there's not much to know, I guess.
You're right. It's a couple paragraphs.
But they did drop a couple bits here and there of the characters that we know and hints at the story we know, like why are the orcs gathering all these rings? And, you know, Isengard and then Saruman, right? At the very end.
At the very end. I'll interject on the orcs gathering the rings. There's one scene kind of oddly in the middle of the siege of Helm's Deep, which they're calling the Hornburg during the movie, where suddenly Hedda, who's the female main character, meets these two orcs and they're collecting rings off of dead bodies. And it's so completely out of place and made up. And the orcs even reference Mordor, which is completely inaccurate. If anything, they would have referenced Dol Guldur, which is actually in the Hobbit movies. So you could have gotten away with that, I feel like. But that whole thing, every part of that section with the orcs, except for Helm coming in and being a badass, was just crazy to me.
Okay. I thought it was, not knowing any of the history, to me, it was a connecting point. Because, I mean, you instantly, you know that there were multiple rings. Mm-hmm. You know that there were rings of power. And that somebody would be looking for rings, you know, which kind of, you know, where the orcs sent out and just find just any rings you find, bring them back. They could be rings of power somehow. So,
well, I'm glad to hear that it worked for the more casual audience then, because that, you know, that is accurate within the lore. Sauron was in Dol Guldur, which is, like I said, the big evil fortress in the Hobbit movies, not the Lord of the Rings movies. And he was searching for the ring at this time. Mm-hmm. And that's actually why Saruman goes to Isengard, is he wants to start searching for the ring as well. He doesn't know Sauron's looking for it yet.
Was Gandalf looking for rings as well? I don't remember.
So there's one line. So there's the thing about the way that Tolkien explains all this story is he'll do it in parts. He'll do like, here's the story of the Rohirrim. Here's the story of the wizards and Galadriel and Elrond. Here's the story of Sauron. And so you have to kind of piece it together. There's one line where Gandalf is advising them to attack Dol Guldur around this era, where he says, we need to take action now. And Saruman talks him down and says, no need to take action, because Saruman, as you know, ends up being a villain.
Right.
And that line is the only way you could say that Gandalf was on the lookout for rings. But then when Bilbo finds his ring, Gandalf has no idea it's the One Ring until he comes back in the Fellowship and shows it to Frodo. So that was really a stretch, I thought.
Okay.
But you liked the orcs, you liked the rings.
I thought the story was compelling. The pacing was good. Mm-hmm. I thought the voice actors they had were good. It was enjoyable. It would have, in my mind, would have fit really nicely within the Lord of the Rings universe. I could see as, and it's not like there's not any real offensive things as far as, you know, objectionable material in it.
No, not really.
I'm not saying from maybe the history lore, but just from like a cultural moral standpoint. There wasn't stuff like you could have your kid watch this and you wouldn't feel like, oh, there's stuff, a 10-year-old wouldn't be worried about like, oh, there's something in here that she's.
No, if you're comfortable with them watching the Lord of the Rings movies, you'll be fine with them watching this. For sure.
Yeah. It wasn't, I mean, there was little bit of gore, but it wasn't like grotesque or any.
Yeah, and anime does do that sometimes, but it didn't do it here.
Yeah.
They did have very busty women.
Oh, did they? I guess they did. I didn't really think
Which
about
is
that.
common for anime.
Yeah. And that was the other thing. Hedda's outfit the entire time is, form-fitting pants. And it's like, it's the dead of winter. There's a blizzard going on and she's not wearing a cloak.
Yeah. My wife was very annoyed with her.
Yeah. So, all right. In general, I think we all mostly liked the story, thought it was pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was okay. I was distracted by the medium though.
Yeah.
I guess I made
that's
that clear already.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's a good point to raise.
I mean, you're not usually watching. I guess unless you're an anime fan and an adult, you're probably not watching a lot of it.
That's right.
So there's some things later in the movie. I just want to get to one point near the beginning of the movie. There is a scene where there's a Mumakil, one of the big elephants from the Battle of Minas Tirith, Pelennor Fields in Return of the King. And it's chasing Hedda around in Rohan, and she's riding away on her horse, and her cousin is trying to save her, and he gets knocked off his horse. And she lures it into the woods and lures it into a swamp where there's one of those big squid things that lock them in Moria in Fellowship of the Ring, waiting in the water. And it's a big squid thing, and it picks up like a 40-ton elephant in its squid arms and then eats it whole.
Yeah. It's pretty fantastical.
That was ridiculous. One, the Watcher in the Water, which is what we've taken to calling it. It doesn't actually have a name in the Fellowship of the Ring that breaks the doors of Moria and forces the Fellowship to go through Moria. That thing, one, it's nameless, and two, it's the only one of its kind that we ever hear about anywhere in Tolkien's story.
Yeah.
Like, there's not even, you can't categorize it with other things because it's so unique.
Yeah. And then she instantly gets kidnapped.
Yeah, she instantly gets kidnapped, which was funny.
Yeah, there were some really hilarious swings of like her being totally defenseless and then just being like the most badass ever.
Yeah.
And then being totally defenseless. It's like, what?
It's kind of reasonable. Like, she does things that you could reasonably expect a princess of Rohan, daughter of Helm, who's been trained, to ride a horse and stuff. She does some adventurous, heroic things you could expect from that kind of person. And then other times she does things, it's like, okay, well, a 6'6" trained badass warrior should be doing these things, not a little girl.
And then she has to get saved by her handmaid, who's probably like 45 or 50 years old.
Right, yeah. And her handmaid is supposed to be one of the shield maidens of Rohan. I couldn't find that. That could be something from Tolkien directly. The term shield maiden of Rohan is from Tolkien. Mm-hmm. But the story that they attached to that character, that they defended Rohan when no one else could, that rings a bell, but I couldn't find it when I was doing some research.
There were a couple scenes that remind me of other films, like or shows even, like Climbing the Ice Wall.
Oh yeah,
and I was like, yeah, that. Oh, actually, they did something like that in Rings of Power too. I think
they do, yeah, in the first episode, I think. Yeah.
But then as well, like Game of Thrones.
Yeah, there's a big famous scene in Game of Thrones. On kind of the same lines, there's a few lines in this movie that are obvious callbacks to the live action movies.
Yeah, I liked that.
I thought it was okay. It worked. I could have done without it personally, but I understand that for casual audiences, it's like, oh, I recognize that.
Yeah.
And that's nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a few lines like that where, Hedda says at one point, he won't see you because his eye will be fixed on me. And it's like, okay, that's Elrond telling Gandalf, the eye is fixed on Rivendell.
Yeah.
So there's...
Oh, they also, I can't remember the line, but they pulled a Legolas line too at one point. Gosh, I can't remember the line, but obviously it wasn't Legolas saying it.
Yeah.
But it was a Legolas line.
Yeah, and I think Freyalaf, the nephew of the king who becomes king at the end of the movie, has an Aragorn line where he says, war is upon you whether you would like it or not, or something like that.
Now his line, because if we fast forward to Lord of the Rings, is he the grandfather or the father of the king that's sitting on the throne in
the Two Towers?
Yeah.
So in the Two Towers, the king is Theoden, and his ancestry goes back, I think it's like 5 or 6 generations. Let's see, I can count it real quick. Theoden, son of Fengel, blah, 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 grandfather, great, quadruple great-grandfather is the one who becomes king at the end of the movie.
Okay.
So Theoden's great-great-great-great-grandfather is the king at the end of this movie.
Freyalaf,
yeah.
Okay.
And, it's interesting that Helm Hammerhand passes the kingship to his nephew, his sister's son, which is the same thing that Theoden does, passing the kingship to Eomer, his sister's son.
I was fully expecting, especially with the way that it was kind of feeling a little bit girl boss at the beginning, I was totally expecting her to just be queen.
They do set that up. They do make it seem like she should be queen, especially because they kind of have Helm being all misogynistic towards her throughout the movie and then kind of coming around and being like, you should be the leader. I don't like that. That's anti-Tolkien, but it fits well for modern audiences. Yeah. There's a lot of changes like that, where it's something that's completely innocuous in terms of modern movie making, but in terms of what Tolkien would have liked, he's spinning in his grave over some of these things.
Yeah, certainly.
It is interesting that they have her, lead the people at the very end, and effectively she's leader while the victory happens. Although you can't say it's entirely credited to her, but I guess the big thing for her was going up, hiking up to that eagle, and then having the eagle go and get
send the crown to Freyla.
Yeah, Freyla. So, but I think the interesting thing though is they have it then that it was like just a moment in time where she saved her people, but then she went off and lived like her adventurous life.
Yeah. Right.
Without the responsibility of being like
queen. So that is the thing that bothered me the most, is that her brother Haleth and her brother Hama both do their loyal duty to Rohan and die fighting.
Right.
And she does her loyal duty throughout this war, but then the rest of her life she's like, Rohan doesn't need me. I'm going to go do my own thing. Who cares? And that does not fit to me with the idea of nobility that we see in Tolkien.
Yeah.
I mean, he has kings and queens? I mean, there's the
he does have queens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But why is it just that Rohan they don't have queens? What's the deal with Rohan?
Yeah, Rohan doesn't have queens. I think the thing that it's important to understand that you only really garner from the histories of Middle-earth that you can read additionally to the story is that Rohan, for its entire about 1,000-year existence before the Return of the King, is a besieged nation. So you need a warrior on the throne.
Okay.
Pretty much the entire time. And so it just doesn't really make sense to have a queen, and they don't. And even in Gondor and Numenor, there's like 2 or 3 ruling queens.
I mean, in a way, I know this is all Anglo-Saxon kind of mythology based, but in a way, Rohan reminds me of the American Indian West in the sense that you could say the natives there would have had a scenario. They always had a chief, right?
Yeah.
Who was kind of like the
kind
king.
of a warlord sort of a thing.
And so you're not going to have a female necessarily sitting in that position because it's based upon, physical prowess and power more than, I mean, yes, there's going to be mental prowess for that as well, but you also have to be able to, like Helm the Hammer, and he was able to kill men with a swing of his fist.
Right.
So, you're not going to get that from a woman. So I wonder if that element kind of played into it, where it was just, I know misogynistic, they would say today, but if it was more just like you were saying, out of necessity.
It's survival. Yeah. Several times, I said 1,000-year history, it's 500 years between when Rohan is founded and the Return of the King. But several times in those 500 years, Rohan is almost wiped out. So they're basically fighting for survival the whole time, or rebuilding from the last time they had to fight for survival. But the other thing about this story that does bother me is from the beginning, Eowyn, who's the narrator, says, you'll hear no stories of Hedda Hammerhand. And then at the end, she, has Hedda go off and do her own thing. And then it proceeds to tell a story where Hedda is absolutely essential to the entire tale of the long winter and the fall of Helm Hammerhand and the recovery of the nation of Rohan. And it implicitly makes all the men around her misogynists who never gave her any credit to any of their children, or else there would be songs of her. And that just sucks.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It does. Yeah. In the beginning of the film, they say, we're going to tell you a story of a hero whose story was never written down.
Yeah.
And that does suck that there would be no songs, because she definitely deserved it.
Yeah, she earned it in this movie. And it's the reason there's no songs is because it's not something Tolkien ever wrote.
Right.
And so they had to come up with an excuse for that. And the excuse they come up with is men don't give women credit.
Yeah.
And I don't like that.
That's a bad excuse.
And I don't know that Tolkien would agree with that.
No. I mean, for crying out loud, Éowyn was one of the first ever warrior females in
Right.
fiction.
Yeah.
And she's still one of the greatest. She slays the Witch King, who is one of the most evil beings alive in Middle Earth at that
It's
time.
like, I am no man
Right.
is the line from that, because he can only be killed by a woman. He can't be killed by a man.
Right. Well, he can't be killed by a man. He is actually killed by Mary and Éowyn together. It takes both of them.
Yeah. Well,
Because
and
Mary
he's
is technically not
he's
a man
not a
either.
man. Yeah.
He's a hobbit.
Yep.
Exactly. So that bothered me. And then I guess on the things that bothered me, we'll get to the end. In the climax of the movie, there's this big climactic fight. And this, did y'all find the siege tower weird?
Yes.
That they were building. I mean, they showed it when they had it collapse on the wall.
Yeah.
Like, why did they just kill their drummer?
I know. So they built this giant siege tower, triangular siege tower thing with a drummer on top.
Right.
And then they just have the whole thing just fall over onto the walls of Helm's Deep. And it's like a triangular tunnel for men to rush through. Maybe that was a real siege weapon at some point in history, but it just seemed completely wild to me.
The way in which they had it fall, I was like, you'd have to have that because it's a really long span.
Mm-hmm.
And they even, I thought when they were showing it collapse onto the wall that it was going to snap in half.
I know.
Yeah.
It looked so rickety.
Yeah.
Trying to recall how the Uruk-hai in the Peter Jackson live action film at the Battle of Helm's Deep did their siege engines. It seems like they might have had a similar thing, but
No. So they have in the movie and the books, they have ladders, and they have extra fortified ladders that use ropes and winches to get them up there. And then they finally use gunpowder in the movie, or just enchantments of Saruman in the book to blow open the wall.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that the siege towers they used, I remember they had them covered with shields or whatever on three sides.
Yeah.
And they rolled them
Return
up,
of the King.
and then they had these giant like hook things that they dropped down that hooked onto the wall, and then they could throw down ramps and run across.
Well, I guess that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah,
it
that's-
was a very short span, but there was like a ramp type thing.
Yeah.
That's the siege of Minas Tirith, though,
Okay.
not Helm's Deep. So that's,
Okay, well.
So yeah, I would agree that the siege engine, if it had been closer to the wall with a smaller expanse, probably would have been better.
Yeah.
Well, I have to, for the defense of the film, and I thought this was kind of interesting. They did have that one scene where the archer, pulls back his bow and shoots at him as they're building this thing, and you see it come up short and land in the dirt. And I think
They're building it out of range.
They're building it out of range of, the archers being able to hit the workers.
Okay, that might have been when I ran to the bathroom, so I may have missed that scene.
Oh, okay.
But going to the things we did like, there's one more thing in this scene where Herda ends up being the one to fight the final climactic duel with Wolf, the main antagonist. And she just beats him. Like 3 times in one duel, she beats him. That was inevitable, the way they were telling the story.
She
but
beat
it's
him as a
stupid.
child as well.
Yeah, she beat him as a child as well in this movie.
in their sparring match.
Whatever. It was inevitable. It's stupid. I don't like that, but I do generally like the movie. I think the relationships between Hedda and her brothers, between Hedda and her father Helm's relationship with the whole kingdom of Rohan and his feeling of kind of failure, and then his final last stand, which is straight out of the books, where he goes out, blows his horn, and then just kills Wolf's men with his bare hands.
Yeah.
And he does that often enough that, Wolf's men will hear the horn blow, and instead of gathering together to try and kill him, they run away because they're so scared of it.
Yep.
And then finally he dies standing up, and he's found the next morning, knees unbent, having, been out killing Wolf's men all night long.
Frozen.
Yes, literally frozen and dead.
Yeah.
I happen to think, I don't know, when I found out that was actually Tolkien lore, it softened my heart a little bit. But when I saw it in the movie, I was just like, what?
It does seem like purely an anime thing, but let me see if I can find the line. It's not very long. Keep going on the...
Yeah, another observation is the keeper of Helmhorn, I guess was what it was called before it was
Helm's Deep.
Yeah. That like gravelly old woman.
Yeah.
She was a weird character, and I never really figured anything out about her, and especially how she was so like creepy and just like confrontational at first, and then at the end she's like, "Oh, honey," like all like grandmotherly at the very end.
Well, that story she tells about the wedding gown and that the bride
So creepy.
But it's supposed to be her, right? Who was the bride?
Do you think that was?
That was what I got from it.
Maybe you're right. Maybe she was the bride. I didn't.
That character's wholly invented as well.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
So on Helm's End and his last stand, one night men heard the horn blowing, but Helm did not return. In the morning there came a sun gleam, the first for long days, and they saw a white figure standing still on the dike alone. For none of the Dunlendings dared come near. There stood Helm, dead as stone, but his knees were yet unbent.
That's pretty cool. And this is also in one of the appendices.
Yeah, that's from the same place as the other bit. And I think Helm Hammerhand is awesome. It's a shame that he loses, basically, but he's awesome. So that's, I guess, most of it. The other relationship in the movie I found very interesting is Hedda and Wolf, even though I don't like the ending. I thought it's interesting they inserted this kind of, there is a romance between them, or there was almost a romance between them. And it lends pathos to the story and makes it more personal. And
yeah, I mean, I think you have to have that in his sense of feeling betrayed by her or rejected by her, and he wants vengeance. I mean, that's his. I mean, he's willing to lose basically everything just so long as he can get vengeance. And I thought that was kind of an interesting element that they really played into.
Yeah. So in general, separating my Tolkien rating from my movie rating, Tolkien rating, it includes an awful lot of actual content from Tolkien. It makes up a lot of stuff. It goes against some themes Tolkien would have. I think Tolkien would have hated it. Parts of it I do not like, and I wish they hadn't done. But in general, I enjoyed this movie. I thought it was pretty good. And then I guess we can go to the real ratings if y'all want.
Sure.
Yeah, one quick thing. You mentioned earlier that there have been other cartoons done.
Rankin Bass, yeah.
Yeah, like I think I've seen the one, The Hobbit, which comparing the two, I think the quality of this is much better.
Oh, certainly.
When did Tolkien die, and were any of these adaptations into cartoon or film made before he died?
Okay, so you asked me the question of when Tolkien died, and there's a cool story for how to remember this.
Okay.
So the ring lore, there's the rings of power. There's one ring to rule them all.
Yes.
9 rings for mortal men.
Yeah.
7 rings for the dwarf lords, and 3 rings for the elves.
Mm-hmm.
And Tolkien died in 1973.
Okay.
Wow.
So there would have been.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. How awesome.
That is kind of cool. So that was there any film adaptations at that point?
Let me find out when Rankin Bass was made, but I do know the Beatles wanted to make a Lord of the Rings movie, and Tolkien said absolutely not.
Well, I kind of can't blame him for rejecting that. That would have been interesting.
Yeah.
So the Hobbit animation came out in 1977.
Okay, so he's dead by that point. Was that the earliest?
Let's find out. Oh, that's not the answer I wanted. 1980. So no, both of them came out after he died.
So so he wouldn't have had an opportunity to give insight for a theatrical or film adaptation.
And Tolkien was convinced that his story was completely unfilmable. And he's right. There's a lot of concepts that even the very excellent Peter Jackson movies completely fail to convey from the books.
And I can understand there's a reason why people still write books and people still read books and people still watch movies. And they're just two different mediums, and it's hard. I know they're tightly intertwined in some ways, but they're also very distinct in their own ways.
Mm-hmm. And you can do things like just tell you what someone's thinking in a book that you can't do in a movie.
Yeah,
certainly.
It's true. Well, they've tried to do that.
They've tried to do it. You can't do it as well.
It doesn't work as well.
The other thing is, one of the concepts in the books is the black breath of the Nazgul, which is this kind of disease they spread, disease of fear, and the movies
how do you
do not communicate that?
Yeah, how do you portray that?
All right, so rating this movie, we have our little chart here that we use for this. And we're going to try to actually average the scores this time if we can keep track of what we rate all these different things.
Okay. Try to keep track.
Let me actually grab a pen real quick.
Yep.
Is it 5 categories?
Yes. So it's woke, intelligent, well-written, artistic value, entertainment, and legacy. And Andrew, I'll write down yours. So
Thank you.
average it for you.
Oh, why am I writing it?
All right.
All right. So
Yeah, you go ahead.
You want, okay.
So first category is woke.
And we're doing this 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 5?
10.
Okay. I'd call it maybe a 3. There were elements of it, but it wasn't terribly.
No, the biggest thing is inventing a female character to center the story around.
Right. Yeah, but I'll call it a 3.
Okay. And then well-written.
Well written, I'd give it a 7.
Okay, a 7. Art.
I criticized the art. I think that the art was good, but I just didn't really like the medium.
It was jarring.
It was for me. Yeah. It detached me from the story in ways that I would have preferred not. So I'm going to give it a 3.
Okay. I guess I need to change the woke value to the inverse because anyhow, for the average. But
Yes.
anyhow, that's technical details you don't need to know about.
Right.
All right. 3 on that one. Entertainment value.
I'll give it 8.
8. I think that's fair. And legacy. Do you think we'll be talking about this in 10 years?
That's a tough one. Because the reason I say that's a tough one is because it is connected to the originals. So
It kind of piggybacks.
it piggybacks. I'll give it a 5.
5. All right. So that averages to 6, I believe.
Okay. I think that's a fair assessment coming from me.
Yeah, it averages to 6. So Andrew's rating for this movie is a 6 out of 10. Not terrible.
Yeah.
Better than some of the recent ones we've done. Thomas?
Yeah. On the woke scale, I'd give it a 3. Writing, I thought the writing was good. I would give it a 7.
Mhm.
Artistic, I would give it probably at least a 7, maybe an 8. I thought that it has one of the things that works well for this medium, anime, when you're doing a story like this, is anime, I think, naturally blends into fantasy really well because it is supposed to be
Larger than life.
weird, different. And so to me, it didn't bother me. So I actually kind of like that. So I'll give it an 8.
Okay. And then legacy.
Entertainment value.
Oh, entertainment value.
Entertaining, I'll give it a 7. It was a little bit predictable, but the pacing was good and everything like that. So yeah, I didn't find myself bored.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. 7.
7.
That's pretty good. And legacy.
This is going to be a tough one too. I think within the realm, it's Lord of the Rings hasn't yet gone the Star Wars route.
Yeah. No, it hasn't.
Please don't.
Please don't.
And so, I mean, this is one film and it's based off of one little bit, like you were saying. So it gave them a lot of leeway to try to just kind of make up a story.
Mhm.
But the way they made it up fits within, I would say, the world of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. I kind of like this better than the three Hobbit movies.
Mhm.
Not that the Hobbit story I love. And I think part of the reason that bugged me was that I felt like they're just stretching it out beyond what they needed to.
They absolutely did.
So, but it comes nowhere near Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. So I'll give it a 6.
A 6.
I think it does have staying power because it's not I don't think it's offensive. I think it fits well. I think it's a decent story. The anime medium may, bother some folks, but it fits in, let's say, with the other cartoons that have come with it.
Yeah.
Like those original Hobbit cartoons. I think it kind of fits in with that nicely.
Yeah. So I'm going to agree largely on y'all's rankings
So
here.
that's overall what?
So your overall ranking was a 7.
7. Okay. That fits.
So Thomas likes it better than Andrew. That's rare that Thomas likes anything more than anyone.
That is rare.
All right. For me, wokeness, I'm actually going to score it worse than y'all did because it's not quite girl boss in the way we usually mean it, but the elevation of a female warrior beating all these men, it really bothers me. I think it really would have bothered Tolkien. So I'm going to give it a 4 on wokeness. It's still not egregious or anything, especially in context of Hollywood, but it bothered me. Well written, I think it was very well written. I thought especially the emotional payoff between Helm and Hedda at the end of his life is very good. I think there's clearly lots of love shown to Tolkien here. I think that mostly, I'm guessing that is due to Philippa Boyens, who was one of the producers on the original movies and writers, and she was on this one as well. So I'll give it an 8 for well written. I think it did quite well. There's some stupid stuff like the Watcher in the Water, but oh well. The art. So there's 2 distinct art styles in this movie. There's the landscape, which is like 3D render, and then there's the characters, which are anime. The landscape blends in perfectly with the Peter Jackson movies. It's explicitly the same stuff, I think. I liked it. I got into it and I just stopped noticing the art style. I was just watching a movie. So I'm going to rank that pretty high. I'll give that a 9, actually. Anime is not my favorite, but I think it works here.
Yeah.
Entertainment value, I was entertained. I like it. Like I said, the very last fight, I'm like, but other than that, I liked it quite a lot. So I'll give it a 7 on entertainment value. And then legacy, I did think when I was watching it that a bunch of people, after watching this movie, when they go watch Two Towers and see the Battle of Helm's Deep, they're going to have more context for it.
Yeah.
They're going to enjoy it more, I think. So I think that's a pretty good legacy because it attaches itself strongly to the movies. I also think it protects the movies by being anime instead of live action.
Yeah.
So it says, if you like it, you can bring it in. If you don't, it's a different art style. You don't have to pretend it's the same thing.
Right.
So I think that was very smart. I'm going to give it I'll give it a 6 because I do still think this movie shouldn't have happened. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I'll watch it again for sure. But I think it would be better if they would just leave it alone and say, what's the next great story we can make movies about?
Yeah.
So my average is 7.2. So 7.
Okay, cool. Isn't it, this film was made due to a licensing agreement, right? Or it was to try and protect rights to the film.
That's what you see happen a lot is when a studio gets rights to a good story, they'll just pump something out to keep the rights. That is what happened here. The reason it's such a limited story that they chose to adapt is because all they have the rights to are the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, and Return of the King. So if it's not in the appendices at the end of the Return of the King, they can't adapt it.
I see.
So that's why they do these things. So yeah,
I do think that the critics didn't really like this one, but the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is actually pretty solid.
Yeah.
And I kind of think that I understand. I mean, I'm not sure what the critics were critical about and to the degree that they were critical of this.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the audience has it right on this one.
Yeah.
Where it's generally favorable. I think almost anybody, if they're more casual fans like you two, I think they'll thoroughly enjoy this probably, assuming the art style doesn't bother them. The music is excellent, of course.
Yeah.
Because it's the same score.
Yeah.
And maybe there were some original tracks. I wasn't sure about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like the language, the voice actors were great. Unless the critics are wanted more like woke messaging or something.
Yeah.
Which maybe that's because anymore, I feel like that's what they're after. So this didn't really provide that. So maybe that's why
That could be it, yeah. Just one more interesting tidbit, though. The orcs that we mentioned that I felt were so out of place and y'all actually liked, I think. Those orcs, the 2 orcs, are played by the actors who play Merry and Pippin in the original movie.
Oh, really?
That's almost like a weird Easter egg kind of a thing.
That's pretty cool, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fun.
All right, any closing thoughts? No. All right. So like I said, I don't think this movie should have happened, but it did. So I think you'll probably enjoy it. Our cumulative average is 6.7 on this, which is, I think, pretty good for us. I don't know that we've rated anything much higher than that.
No.
Maybe Oppenheimer.
Maybe Oppenheimer.
Yeah, Oppenheimer.
So yeah, it's a good movie. Go enjoy it as this new year begins, because this episode will be coming out in the new year. And we'll see you next time. Oh, we're the Pop Culture Contrarian. We're brought to you by The Patriot Post. Be sure to like and subscribe to The Patriot Post. It is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right and it's free. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
See you guys.